If your doctor ever tells you that you have a high red blood cell count, you're probably going to be pretty concerned about it because red blood cells are important for carrying oxygen throughout your body. Having too many of them is just as bad as not having enough. So let's find out exactly why this happens and what it means for you. Now, there are several reasons why you might have more red blood cells than normal. And I think it's really important that we go through all of these so that you can understand what's happening in your body. But before we do that, I need you to understand one thing. I cannot tell you whether or not you have a high red blood cell count. I don't know what your medical history is. I don't know if you've been on the phone with your doctor lately. And most importantly, I don't want to give you any medical advice. This video is for educational purposes only, so please talk to your doctor if you have any concerns about your health. That being said, let's get into it. There are two main situations where you might have a higher than normal red blood cell count. The first is polycythemia vera, which simply means that your bone marrow is making too many red blood cells. Now, obviously, this isn't great because too many red blood cells can cause all sorts of problems like blood clots or strokes. But the good news is that polycythemia vera is relatively rare. In fact, according to the National Library of Medicine, it affects around 32 people per million. That's just over 1% of the population, which is pretty small if you ask me. But what about the other situation where you might have a higher than normal red blood cell count? Well, that would be when your body is reacting to low levels of oxygen. You see, our bodies are constantly trying to maintain a delicate balance between making too many red blood cells and not making enough. It's called homeostasis, and it's one of the most important things that our bodies do. If you have too many or too few red blood cells, it can cause all sorts of problems. So our bodies have evolved some really sophisticated mechanisms to keep everything in check. One of these mechanisms is called erythropoiesis, which literally means the production of red blood cells. When there's less oxygen available to your body will produce more red blood cells in order to compensate. This is a natural response to low levels of oxygen, and it's actually a really good thing. After all, red blood cells are what carry oxygen throughout your body. So if you have low levels of oxygen, it makes sense that your body would try to make more red blood cells in order to compensate. But what happens when your body produces too many red blood cells? Well, that's where things get interesting. You see, when your body produces more red blood cells, it also produces more hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a protein that carries oxygen in your red blood cells, and it's made up of 4 parts, each containing 1 iron atom. Iron is essential for life, and it's also what gives blood its color. But too much iron in your bloodstream can be toxic. In fact, it's one of the most common nutrient deficiencies in the world. So when your body produces more red blood cells, it also produces more iron. And if you already have too much iron in your body, well, you're just asking for trouble. One of the problems with too much iron in your bloodstream is that it can damage your organs, particularly your liver. Your liver is responsible for filtering toxins out of your blood, but too much iron can overwhelm your liver and cause it to fail. Another problem with too much iron in your bloodstream is that it can increase your risk of cancer. According to the American Cancer Society, people with hemochromatosis are 8 times more likely to develop liver cancer than those without the condition. And that's because too much iron in your bloodstream can damage your DNA, which can lead to cancer. So you might be wondering, how do you get too much iron in your bloodstream? Well, there are a few different ways. The most common way is through the consumption of red meat. Red meat is high in iron, and too much iron in your diet can lead to a condition called iron overload. People with iron overload have too much iron in their bodies, and this can cause all sorts of problems, including liver damage and an increased risk of cancer. Another way to get too much iron in your bloodstream is through genetic factors. There are a few different genetic disorders that can cause iron overload, and these disorders are usually passed down from parents to their children. And here's another twist. Too much iron in your bloodstream can also lead to inflammation. Inflammation is your body's way of responding to injury or infection, but chronic inflammation can be harmful. Chronic inflammation has been linked to a number of diseases, including heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. So it's clear that too much iron in your bloodstream can cause all sorts of problems. But what does that have to do with red blood cells? Well, when you have too many red blood cells, you also have too much hemoglobin. And as I mentioned earlier, hemoglobin is what carries oxygen in your red blood cells. It's also what gives blood its color. But too much hemoglobin in your bloodstream can cause all sorts of problems, including blood clots and strokes. That's because hemoglobin can form clots in your blood vessels, which can block the flow of blood to your organs. This can cause all sorts of problems, including organ failure. You might be wondering why this doesn't happen to everyone who has too many red blood cells. After all, if too much hemoglobin causes clots, then shouldn't everyone who has too many red blood cells be at risk for clots? Well, not necessarily. It turns out that the risk of clots is also influenced by other factors, such as your age and medical history. For example, people over the age of 60 are at increased risk for clots, as are people who have a history of smoking. So let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture here. Too many red blood cells can cause all sorts of problems, including blood clots and strokes. But the good news is that there are treatments available to help manage these conditions. For example, there are medications that can thin your blood and prevent clots. And lifestyle changes, such as eating a healthy diet and exercising regularly, can also help reduce your risk of developing clots. In addition to blood clots, having too many red blood cells can also make your blood more sticky, which can lead to atherosclerosis. Atherosclerosis is a condition in which plaque builds up in your arteries, which can block the flow of blood to your organs. This can cause all sorts of problems, including heart attacks and strokes, but the good news is that lifestyle changes, such as eating a healthy diet and exercising regularly, can help reduce your risk of developing atherosclerosis. So now you know that having too many red blood cells isn't always a bad thing. In fact, it's actually a natural response to low levels of oxygen. But you also know that too many red blood cells can cause all sorts of problems. The key is to be aware of the risks and take steps to reduce them. As I mentioned earlier, there are treatments available to help manage the conditions that can cause problems from too many red blood cells. So if you have a high red blood cell count, don't panic. Just talk to your doctor and see what treatment options are available to you. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe for more medical warning videos. And remember, I cannot tell you whether or not you have a high red blood cell count. I don't know your medical history. I don't know if you've been on the phone with your doctor lately. And most importantly, I don't want to give you any medical advice. This video is for educational purposes only. Thank you for watching.